In fact, the MIT Media Lab had famously crowdsourced a similar question with its website called the Model Machine, where it gave different kinds of trolley problems to people, and more than 2 million people from some 200 countries participated in the study, logging more than 40 million decisions, and received some really fascinating insights. For example, players in southern countries were more likely to kill a fat person, a figure with a large stomach, and spare an athletic person, a figure that appeared mid-jog wearing shorts and a sweatband. Players in countries with high economic inequality, like Venezuela and Colombia, were more likely to spare a business executive, a figure with a suitcase, than a homeless person, a hunched figure with a hat, a beard, and patches on his clothes. In countries where the rule of law is particularly strong, like Japan or Germany, people were more likely to kill jaywalkers than lawful pedestrians. Most players spared women over men. Dogs were more likely to be spared than cats. In fact, dogs were more likely to be spared than criminals. How do you think we could deal with such vast cultural differences?
So there's three things here. One is that the MIT Moral Machine project, if you read closely into the study, I don't think that it doesn't measure what people think is ethical. It measures what people prefer, right? Yeah. Now, I prefer lots of things, right? I prefer strawberry to chocolate, right? My wife prefers chocolate to strawberry. That's not a moral decision. It's just a preference. The other thing they did is, because it was a self-selecting sample, some really interesting results happened. So in their main paper in Nature, they had a big wheel which described all of the countries grouped by similar responses. And one of the things that we found is, in the West Bloc, you had countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, whereas the UAE and other Middle Eastern countries were over in the Eastern Bloc, typically. Now, why might that be? Well, one reason might be that Iraqis and Afghanis have exactly the same preferences as Americans and Canadians. The other reason might be that the people they were actually getting, who had IP addresses or were located in Iraq and Afghanistan, were American service personnel inside military bases in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? So what the Moral Machine project has yet to do is really demonstrate cultural differences. Now, there's a really great issue of the journal Risk Analysis, which actually does start to do some of these like deep cultural analyses with, verifiable data about people's culture. So you're still right. And so then the two things we can say is, one is that vehicles are not yet sophisticated enough to tell the age of someone. So in some ways, this is a technical problem, which is really interesting to philosophers, but much less interesting to engineers. So the engineers on my grant are like, why do we care about this? I can't tell who the age of a person is anyway in my car, or my car can't tell the age of a person. But these might be things where we leave this up to individual communities to make these decisions. Now, in case that sounds strange, just think when someone gets a liver transplant all over the world, there are international guidelines that have been created by the WHO, but they are usually implemented locally, right? So the precise reasons that you in India might be given a liver where someone else is not given a liver might be just a little bit different than the reasons that I in Boston would be given a liver rather than someone else, right? So these are what we call triage algorithms. And so I think that there's a place for the United Nations to set basic guidelines, maybe through the International Telecommunications Union or the UN offices at Geneva or the Sustainable Development Goals. But then each country will have to make laws on their own. And those laws are going to be very slightly different. And there are some times when I think that some of the ways that certain countries allocate organs are probably wrong. But by and large, there's this room for a reasonable disagreement between countries and between communities about what matters. The last thing that I would note is that the biggest cultural hurdle that autonomous vehicles have to surmount is not actually the people, but the quality of the roads. So 90% of car crashes happen in the developing developing worlds in a variety of climates, and yet most autonomous vehicles are only tested in like California. I don't know about you, but living where I do in Boston, my roads are not the same as California roads. So there's a bigger question about how we program autonomous vehicles around culture.
Well,